Far from Home, Portraits of Displacement, written by Gabriel Ndayishimiye. Chapter 4. The Aspiring Exiled Politician. The cafe is nearly empty, just a few tired souls nursing their drinks like they're afraid to let them go. You're in the corner, the same spot you've claimed for weeks now, trying to remember what it felt like to be relevant. There's a crack in the plaster above the window that looks like a river on a map. You trace it with your eyes, over and over, as if memorizing it might give you some kind of direction. Outside, the rain is relentless, washing the streets clean of whatever stories they carried yesterday. It's one of those afternoons where nothing feels solid, where you're not even sure your own skin fits right. You're not really thinking about anything in particular, just letting the emptiness stretch out. When he walks in, the aspiring exiled politician. He doesn't belong here. That's your first thought. He's too sharp, too purposeful, while the rest of you are soft around the edges, worn down by waiting. He cuts through the room like he's still got somewhere to be, something important to accomplish. There's nothing resigned or defeated about him. He's like a man who has never really known loss. He orders without looking at the menu, like he's above needing to know the local customs. He sits by the window, carefully angled, so anyone passing by will see him being pensive, see him being relevant. You don't need to hear him to know how the conversation will go. He'll talk about his exile like it's a badge of honor, like it's something that happened to him, something forced on him by lesser minds and cowardly men. He'll spin his tales of injustice and resistance, and he'll make sure every word lands just right. Even the way he sips his coffee seems calculated, like he's rehearsing for an interview that hasn't been scheduled yet. You wonder what he would say if you asked him outright. What makes your exile so noble while the rest of us are just forgotten ghosts? You know the answer before you even ask. He would smile, patient and patronizing, and remind you that his exile is different, that it's political, purposeful, steeped in sacrifice, that he's fighting a war from afar while you're just drifting. He'd never admit it, but he thinks the rest of you are nothing, just casualties of some grand ideological battle that only he understands. He doesn't know what it's like to actually lose something, to feel your own language growing foreign on your tongue, to know that your voice doesn't carry weight anymore, no matter how loud you speak. He's never tasted the quiet erosion that comes when your own people forget you, when your stories grow stale and your words turn to ash before they even hit the air. He thinks he's an exiled intellectual, like the ones who wrote themselves into history, the ones who became symbols of defiance and thought. But there's a difference. Those intellectuals spoke because silence was betrayal. They wrote because forgetting was a kind of death. They didn't turn their exile into a performance. They didn't cultivate it like a garden, trimming the edges to make sure it looked just tragic enough. But he's mastered the art of being gone. His absence is louder than his presence ever was. He's not really in exile at all. He's just broadcasting from another location. Exile for him is a spotlight, a way to amplify his voice without having to actually be there, on the ground, facing the fallout of his own failures. He'll sit in his foreign cafes and spin his stories, while the rest of you just try to keep breathing, to not let the rot set in too deep. The aspiring exiled politician. He doesn't really leave. He just moves his power somewhere else. Exile, for him, isn't a wound or a reckoning. It's a strategy, a well-crafted performance designed to make his absence more powerful than his presence ever was. While the rest of you are trying to hold on to some scrap of identity and dignity, he's out there building a legend. He doesn't vanish into the blur of the displaced or get swallowed by obscurity like the rest of you. No, he turns exile into a stage, and he's always at the center of it. He tells his story like it's a damn epic, how he's been wronged, persecuted, how he had no choice but to leave for the sake of the cause. It's never about running or losing. It's about making a necessary retreat. He never stops talking, never stops reminding people of what he used to be, of what he'll be again once the dust settles. He's not an exile. He's just a leader on a break, pausing the revolution to build up his myth from afar. And you sit there, wondering if you'll ever know what it's like to matter that much, to have people remember your name, even when you're not there to remind them, to have your absence carry weight instead of just fading into static. Maybe that's why you hate him, because he's found a way to make exile work for him, while the rest of you just survive it. Because his exile looks like power, and yours just looks like forgetting. The general walks in like he owns the place, and for a second, I almost believe he does. There's something about the way he moves, like the air itself knows to get out of his way. Even here, even now, stripped of his uniform and his medals, dressed in civilian clothes that don't fit him quite right, he still carries himself like he's commanding a battalion. His jaw set like he's giving orders without saying a word. He spots me, gives a nod that might have been mistaken for a greeting if it hadn't felt more like acknowledgement. Like I'm just another fixture in the landscape, another piece of furniture he expects to be there. He doesn't ask if he can sit down, just pulls out the chair and drops into it like he's claiming territory. He used to be someone, a general, one of the old guard, the kind who didn't just bark orders, but led from the front, the kind who still had mud on his boots, while the major general stayed polished and crisp back at headquarters. Once they were brothers in arms, two heads of the same beast, clawing their way out of the wilderness and into power. But power changes things. The major general became the president. The general became a problem. You can tell he's still bitter about it. Even now, exiled and aging, he doesn't talk about it like a betrayal. He talks about it like a strategic misstep, like he should have seen it coming, should have maneuvered better. But he never talks about regret. Regrets for men who lose and stay lost. Not him. No, he's just making a necessary retreat, repositioning himself for the next battle. He clears his throat, orders coffee, black, no sugar. Doesn't look at me when he speaks. They're still afraid of me, you know, he says, his voice like gravel scraping concrete, even now, because they know I still have loyalty. You don't kill a general like me. You just push him out and hope he rots. He chuckles, but it's not a laugh, more like a test, seeing if I'll laugh with him, validate the myth. You want to tell him that it's not fear anymore? Not really. It's just the residue of fear, what's left when the real threat's been worn down by time and irrelevance. But you don't say it. You just nod, because you know he needs that. Needs to feel like he's still in the game, like his absence is a threat instead of just an afterthought. They don't talk about you much, you say, careful to make it sound like a conspiracy instead of neglect. He huffs out a breath like he expected that. Of course not. They can't afford to. The Major General knows if people start remembering me, they'll start remembering how we got there in the first place. They'll remember I was the one out front, keeping him alive while he sat in his tent and made plans. He'd still be rotting in some backwater jail if it weren't for me. He's got to make people forget that. You let him have that one, even though it doesn't really line up with how people remember it. They think of him now as the one who overreached, too ambitious, too reckless. They remember the stories about him trying to take the power for himself, about the quiet, efficient way the president pushed him aside and didn't look back. But the general never sees it that way. He's still fighting that battle in his head, still convinced that people are just waiting for him to come back and set things right. What's the plan, you ask, just to keep him talking? He shrugs, the way someone shrugs when they're pretending not to care too much. Timing. It's all about timing. Can't rush these things. You go back too soon and you're a dead man. You wait too long and they forget you ever mattered. You gotta make sure the memory stays sharp. Keep the loyalists fed. Keep the story alive. You understand. You don't. You don't understand at all. Because exile doesn't feel like a strategy. It feels like erosion, like every day. Another piece of you gets worn away until there's nothing left but the version people remember. And that version doesn't even look like you anymore. But he's not like that. He doesn't erode. He calcifies, becomes more of what he was with every day that passes. People back home still talk about me, he says, almost to himself. They still remember who kept them safe, who got them through it all. They know what I did. You wonder if he actually believes that, or if he's just saying it to convince himself. The thing about exiled intellectuals is they talk because silence means surrender. They speak because the void is always waiting to swallow them whole. But him? He talks because he thinks his story is a living thing that needs feeding. He's not reflecting on his fall or questioning his own decisions. He's maintaining his myth, like it's a campfire that'll go out if he doesn't keep stoking it. He doesn't see exile like the rest of you do. To him, it's not an affliction. It's an opportunity. He's not interested in preserving his own humanity or reflecting on the mess that got him here. No, he's busy building his legend from a distance, turning his absence into a political machine, keeping himself relevant without actually being present. But you know how it'll end. One day, the myth will wither, and he'll just be another ghost of a leader who never returned. He doesn't know it yet, still too full of his own story to see how brittle it's become. But the day will come when his followers stop waiting, when they realize the past he's selling doesn't matter anymore. The war moved on without him. The people moved on without him. He's still too proud to see it. He leans back, eyes fixed on some point far away, maybe seeing a city he can't get back to, imagining his triumphant return. You want to ask him what he'd actually do if he got back, whether he really thinks he'd be welcomed, or if the country would just look at him and see a relic. You almost say it, but you don't. You just sit there and listen to him make plans, like a man who thinks he's still in command. And when he's gone, off to wherever exiled generals haunt their memories, you sit there and wonder why you're still letting him get to you, why it still feels like his myth takes up more space than your reality, why you can't shake the feeling that somehow, despite it all, he's still convinced he'll win. Exile isn't what you think. It's not a wound. It's not a scar. It's a space between the man you were and the man you say you are now. It's the kind of distance that makes people wonder if you're really gone or just waiting to come back. Some men go quiet when they're exiled. They let the world forget them. Others make it loud. They make their absence feel like it matters more than their presence ever did. The aspiring exiled politician knows how to do that. He doesn't disappear. He doesn't slip away into the dark corners of foreign streets. He stays in the light, makes himself seen, makes sure people remember his name. He talks about exile like it's something noble, something forced on him because he was too brave to stay quiet. He makes it sound like a duty, like a hard decision he had to make for the sake of the cause. He's smart about it. He knows how to use the distance. He knows that people will fill in the gaps for him, make him out to be something more than he ever was. He talks about the struggle and the fight and how one day he'll come back and set things right. But he never says when, and he never says how. He just keeps the idea alive, like a fire that never goes out. He doesn't live like the rest of the exiled. He doesn't fight to keep his language from slipping away or his story from getting old. He doesn't claw at memories that feel like they're fading. He sits at cafe tables and makes plans. He writes letters and gives speeches and makes sure everyone knows that he's still in control, even if he's miles away from the place he says he belongs. He's built something out of his absence, made it work for him, turned it into power. People keep talking about him like he's coming back any day now, like he's just getting ready for the right moment. He's not losing anything while he's gone. He's just biding his time. And when he does come back, it'll be like he never left. That's the trick. To make it seem like exile was all part of the plan. But one day, people will stop believing. One day, they'll realize that being gone for too long means something. They'll see that while he was busy building his legend, the real work was being done by men who never left. The country will change without him, and he'll come back to a place that doesn't remember him the way he wants to be remembered. That's the problem with exile. It only works if people keep believing in the story. If they stop believing, you're just another man who left and never came back. A ghost of something that used to be important. He doesn't know that yet. He's still out there, making his plans, holding court from a distance. He thinks his words still matter the way they used to. Maybe they do. Maybe they don't. But one day he'll find out that you can't hold power from across the water. You have to stand on the ground you're claiming, or it's not yours at all. Exile isn't always what it looks like. Sometimes it's not defeat. Sometimes it's not running away. Sometimes it's just strategy. A man doesn't always vanish into exile because he's stripped of power. Sometimes he leaves because staying would be worse. Sometimes exile is just a long pause, a way to keep the story alive without having to stand in the fire. You hear people talk about him like he's a victim, like he fled because they were closing in on him, like he had no choice but to run. That's how he wants it told. That's how he makes sure it's told. A leader forced out, betrayed, hunted. He keeps the story sharp. Makes it sound like they pushed him out because they couldn't handle him, couldn't control him. It's not about losing. It's about being too strong, too bold, too much of a threat. But you can't help wondering, did he really flee because he had to? Or did he see it coming long before and decide that exile would suit him better? Maybe he was already losing his grip. Maybe he saw the crowds thinning out, saw the loyalty draining away, saw the way his own men started looking at him like a problem instead of a leader. Maybe he knew staying would only drag him down, make him look small, make him look like he was hanging on out of desperation. Maybe exile wasn't forced on him at all. Maybe it was an escape he dressed up as a stand. You wonder when he first figured out how to make exile work for him? Maybe it was right away, when people were still angry about him being gone, when they still muttered his name like a prayer. Or maybe it took a while, when he saw that distance had softened his edges, blurred the bad decisions, turned his failures into stories of struggle and sacrifice. Time is kind to men who aren't there to mess things up in real time. Did he plan it all? Did he know how to make his departure look like strategy, not surrender? Or was it just chaos and fear at first, and he only later found a way to make it look like part of the plan? You don't know. Maybe nobody knows but him. But he's smart. He understands that power isn't about being there. It's about being remembered. So he doesn't let them forget him. He doesn't just sit in exile like some broken man licking his wounds. He makes his absence count. He frames it as a sacrifice, a punishment for being too righteous, too bold. He never calls it running away. He calls it being pushed out by men too small to understand the fight. From where he sits now, he has time. He has space. He has the luxury of not having to deal with the mess of actually leading. He's free to shape the story without being accountable for anything falling apart back home. It's clever. From exile, he doesn't have to solve anything. He just has to keep the story alive, keep being the promise of what could have been. And that's his real power now. He's not a man anymore. He's not a leader or a politician. He's an idea, a legend that keeps growing without him having to lift a finger. He doesn't have to worry about making decisions or facing consequences. He's just a myth, waiting for the right moment to come back and claim what he says was always his. You can't exile a myth. You can't bury it or kill it. Myths don't bleed or break or lose elections. Myths just wait. Wait to be needed again. And he knows that. He's not gone. He's just waiting to be remembered right. He knows better than to just disappear. That would be giving up. That would be letting them win. No. He makes sure his exile isn't just some quiet exit. It's not an absence at all. It's a presence stretched out over time and distance, stretched so thin it seems almost sacred. He doesn't let himself be forgotten. He makes his absence feel like a crime. He doesn't say I was removed. He says the people have been orphaned. He doesn't say I was exiled. He says the country has lost its rightful leader. He never frames it as his own loss. That would be weakness. Instead, it's the nation's loss, a wound inflicted on the people, a theft of what rightfully belongs to them. If exile is meant to erase him, He'll make sure that erasure itself becomes the reason they can't forget. He knows how power works. It's not about being there. It's about making people feel the gap you left behind. It's about turning absence into longing. Nostalgia is a weapon, if you wield it right. It doesn't matter what he really did before or what kind of leader he was. People don't remember truth. They remember feeling. And he knows how to make them feel like he's the one thing they're missing. He doesn't stay quiet. Every once in a while, he releases a statement or sends a message, just enough to keep the memory alive, just enough to keep people thinking that maybe, if he were still there, things wouldn't have fallen apart. They start talking about him differently. First they say it's a tragedy that he's gone. Then they start saying it's a mistake. Then it becomes a prophecy. When he comes back, things will get better. He makes them need him. It's not enough to be remembered. You have to be missed. He knows how to shape his story for whoever's listening. To his people, he's the exiled leader, still fighting for them from afar. He makes sure they don't forget his face, his words, his promises. He talks like he's never really left, like he's just out on business and any day now he'll walk back in. He wants them to believe that his return is inevitable, that it's only a matter of time. To the world beyond, he's the noble leader forced into exile by tyrants, the reformer who dared to challenge power. He wraps his ambitions in principle. He knows they don't respect ambition for its own sake. They like to see power softened by purpose, cloaked in ideals. So he talks about democracy, justice, human rights. He plays the part of the statesman abroad, shaking hands with diplomats and dropping lines about rebuilding his country one day. And to his enemies back home, he's the ghost they can't get rid of. They try to replace him, try to erase him, but every mistake they make just feeds his legend. Every time the new leaders stumble, people whisper his name. They're supposed to be in control, but he makes them look like placeholders, just keeping the seat warm for his return. He knows how symbols work. They last longer than men, so he makes himself into one. A flag, a phrase, a chant, his face on walls, his name whispered in bars, his story passed around like an old myth. He doesn't beg for his place in history. He warns them it's already written. He doesn't ask if he'll return. He makes them believe he never really left. And distance, that's his ally. It scrubs his past clean. It wipes away the failures, the bad choices, the compromises. All that remains is the idea of him. Untarnished, untested. He wasn't corrupt. He was set up. He wasn't weak. He was betrayed. The mess they're in now, it's not because of him. It's because he's gone. He doesn't need to beg for his return. The people demand it for him. They believe they can't move forward without him. He doesn't have to make his case. They do it for him. He's untouchable now, not because he's absent, but because they've convinced themselves that he's the only one who can fix it. He knows exile isn't the end, it's just the setup, a long game. When he comes back, and he will, he won't return as a man seeking power. He'll come back as the one who never lost it. Not a politician looking for votes, but the rightful leader stepping back into place. The man who was always meant to be there. He doesn't see exile as loss. He sees it as transformation. The myth becomes stronger while he's gone. And when he returns, it won't be as a fallen leader. It will be as the man whose absence was just a prologue, a promise kept, a prophecy fulfilled. He doesn't need to be there to be in charge. That's the trick. Power isn't about standing in front of them. It's about making them feel like you never left. He knows that. So he doesn't rule by showing up. He rules by making sure they never stop talking about him. You think he's gone, but he's everywhere. His voice drifts over the border, slips into radios, shows up on screens. His face is still familiar, still shows up on murals, on flyers, on the walls of bars where people still whisper his name. He's not just some exiled ghost. He's a presence, a shadow that refuses to fade. He's careful. He doesn't overdo it. Too much talking and they'll forget the difference between him and every other loudmouth exile. Too little, and they'll think he's given up. He knows how to time it just right. When things go wrong back home, he makes sure his voice gets there first. A policy crumbles, he'll tell them it wouldn't have happened if he'd been there. A riot breaks out. He'll remind them that it's the fault of those who took his place. He never lets them forget that his absence is the problem, not his leadership. He knows how to play the distance. Distance can make a leader seem small, irrelevant, but not him. He uses it like a stage. He doesn't speak like an exile begging to come back. He speaks like a leader who's just handling things from another office. He doesn't sound like he's on the outside. He sounds like he's still running the show, just from a different room. He doesn't touch power directly, but his fingerprints are all over it. He has people who stayed behind, loyalists, allies, old friends who still owe him favors. They don't say his name too loud, but they know he's still the one giving orders. They keep the memory alive. They make sure nobody gets too comfortable in his old chair. They keep their heads down and wait for the signal that it's time to bring him back. But he doesn't trust them. Not really. He knows power makes men greedy. He knows some of them are just waiting for their chance to be him, to take the spot he left behind. He keeps them on edge. He whispers just enough to keep them loyal, enough to make sure they remember they're just placeholders. He's still the center of it all. They're just keeping the seat warm. He makes himself visible without being too much. A video here, a broadcast there. Sometimes it's just a statement, short and sharp, like he's still issuing orders. Sometimes it's an interview with foreign media, speaking like a statesman, not like some desperate exile. He makes sure his words cut through the noise, makes sure they land like they came from someone who's never stopped leading. And when the regime screws up, he's the first to pounce. He doesn't just criticize, he offers himself as the solution. He frames it so they can't help but think, if only he were still here. He doesn't let his absence feel like a gap. He makes it feel like proof of how badly they need him back. Social media, exile radio, satellite TV. He knows how to use them all. He stays on their screens, on their phones, in their ears. He doesn't sound like he's hiding. He sounds like he's just one step away from coming back. It's all strategy. He doesn't waste words. Every sentence is aimed, precise, meant to remind them that he's not gone. He's just biding his time. And when his enemies mess up, he doesn't just criticize them. He makes sure people know that every failure, every crisis is just another reason why he was right all along. He turns every problem into proof that they were wrong to push him out. He doesn't beg for his place back. He doesn't ask to come home. He just makes it clear that his return isn't a question of if, it's a question of when. He's not coming back as some fallen leader asking for another chance. He's coming back as the one who never really left, as the one who kept his hand on the pulse even from 1,000 miles away. That's how he governs without being there. He doesn't make them miss him. He makes them think they still have him, just on the other side of the border. He makes them believe that bringing him back is just setting things right again, like closing the door they never meant to leave open. And he waits, patient and certain, because power isn't about being there. It's about making them feel like you never really left. He knows you can't survive exile alone. You can't just sit there and wait for people to remember you. You need leverage. You need friends who can pull strings. So he builds alliances, carefully, deliberately. Not with the desperate ones, not with the fellow exiles who are just as forgotten as you are. No, he goes for the big players, governments that see him as useful, foreign powers that want a change of regime back home, factions that look at him and see leverage, a way to shift the balance without getting their own hands dirty. But alliances aren't free. Nothing ever is. They'll want something in return. A new economic order, maybe. Access to resources. Some trade deal that puts them ahead when he's back in charge. They want to invest in his future, but they expect dividends. And he knows that. He knows he's not just a politician anymore. He's a chip in a game they're playing, a potential investment they're betting on. He's valuable as long as they think he'll make it back. But he has to be careful. If his people catch wind that he's a puppet, that he's selling out to foreign interests, it's over. They'll see him as compromised, weak. He can't afford that. He has to make it look like he's independent, like he's the one pulling the strings, not the other way around. To his allies, he has to be cooperative, pliable. To his people, he has to be unbending, proud. It's a balancing act, and one wrong move means falling flat on his face. He's good at it, though. He doesn't just talk to the people. He talks as if he's one of them. His voice sounds like their voice, full of frustration and weariness. He tells them they're suffering together, that his absence is their wound, that his exile is just another way they've been betrayed. He doesn't make them feel like they're waiting for him. He makes them feel like they're waiting with him. It's not just his return. It's theirs too. And nostalgia. That's his biggest weapon. He makes them remember things that never quite happened the way he says they did. He talks about the good old days, back when he was in charge, back when things were better. Never mind that half of it's myth. Never mind that his promises never really panned out. It doesn't matter. What matters is that they remember it as better, as something worth wanting back. The truth never holds up against a memory that makes you feel safe. He doesn't have to be there to make them feel him. He just has to remind them that everything went wrong the moment he was forced to leave, that his absence is the reason for the chaos, for the suffering, for the loss. And when he does come back, if he comes back, it won't feel like a new chapter. It'll feel like fixing a mistake, like righting a wrong. They won't say, he's back. They'll say, he never really left. That's how he governs without governing. That's how he stays in charge without being there. He makes exile feel like an illusion, like he's just around the corner, waiting for the right moment to step back in. He makes them believe his absence is just a temporary mistake. And when he walks back into the room, it won't feel like change. It'll feel like home. You watch him sometimes, sitting there, spinning his tails like a spider building a web. At first, you think it's all calculation, a plan so tight it can't fail. He tells his story like he's dictating it straight into history, making sure every word lands just right. You watch the way he shapes his myth like he's carving it out of stone, and you almost admire it. Almost. Because it's not just about surviving exile. It's about making exile work for him. You know he didn't plan to be gone this long. Nobody ever does. Exile was supposed to be a strategic pause, a brief retreat before he came back stronger. He called it preparation. He called it building power from a distance. You remember the way he spoke about it in those early days. Like it was just another maneuver. Like he'd be back before the ink was dry on the warrants. Back when he still believed he was in control. But something changed. You could see it happening slowly, creeping into the way he talked, the way he carried himself. At first, it was all about strategy, about making sure his name stayed relevant, that his supporters didn't forget him, that his enemies couldn't claim victory. He knew how nostalgia worked. He knew how to let distance blur the edges of his failures, how to make absence turn him into something grander than he ever was when he was right there in front of them. But then the myth started to take hold of him, too. You watched it happen. He stopped talking about going back and started talking about destiny. Like his return wasn't just a plan, but a prophecy. He couldn't just be a man anymore. He had to be a symbol, a promise of something better. You see the way he walks now, like he's not just planning his next move, but fulfilling something larger than himself. He doesn't say it outright, but you know he's convinced that history itself is wrapped around him like it's holding its breath, waiting for him to step back onto the stage. And maybe he didn't see it happening to himself. Maybe he didn't notice the way strategy bled into belief, but you did. You saw how he stopped being careful with his words, how he started to believe in his own myth. You'd hear him talk about how the people were waiting, how they were just holding on for him to come back and fix everything, like he wasn't just a leader, but a necessity, like he was the glue that would hold the country together the moment he set foot back on its soil. Sometimes you wonder if he even knows he's doing it, turning himself into something bigger than life, something that can't be questioned. You wonder if he ever stops and thinks about whether the people really are waiting for him, or if that's just a story he's told himself so many times he can't see the truth anymore. He's been gone so long. Does he even know what's left to come back to? You don't ask him. You wouldn't dare. He's too far gone into his own legend now, too convinced that his return is not just necessary, but inevitable. You wonder what he would do if he knew the country has moved on, if he knew that the stories people tell now don't include him the way they used to. But he doesn't talk about doubt. He doesn't talk about failure. He talks about responsibility, about unfinished business, about the duty of coming back and setting things right. He doesn't know how to be just a man anymore. That's the trouble. He's convinced himself that He's history walking, that his return will be the final chapter in some epic that's been unfolding since the day he left. You wonder if he even remembers the real reason he left in the first place, whether it was really forced or if he saw the cracks forming and got out before it all fell in on him. He's too far in now to admit any of that. It would mean unraveling the myth, and he can't afford that. And that's the thing you can't get past. When did he stop being a leader and start being something else? Something that doesn't see people as anything but stepping stones to his return. When did he start believing that he's not just coming back to lead, but to claim what's rightfully his? You wonder what will happen if he does come back. If he steps off that plane and finds that nobody's waiting for him, or worse, if they are waiting, but not with the open arms he imagines. You wonder if he can survive that, if his myth can take that kind of blow. But you know he doesn't think about that. In his mind, the people are still holding their breath, still waiting for him to save them. He can't see that maybe they've already moved on, that maybe the country he left behind is not the country that exists now. He's convinced himself that his return is fate, that it's not just a possibility, but a certainty. You don't know how to tell him that it doesn't work that way, that myths can turn sour, that legends can rot from the inside out. You keep your mouth shut because you know it wouldn't matter. He's too deep into it now, too far gone to see that he might just be building himself up for a fall. But you keep watching him, wondering what happens when the myth collides with reality, wondering if he's ready to find out that history didn't wait for him after all. You watch him talk, and you wonder if he ever thinks about the mess he left behind. You can't help it. You listen to him tell his story like he's reciting scripture, making sure every word lands just right. The way he frames it, exile was never his fault. It was the betrayal of lesser men. It was enemies conspiring to drag him down. It was politics turning savage, and him being too pure, too noble to fight back. But you know better. You were there when the foundation started cracking. You remember the whispers getting louder, the streets turning restless, the allies who started looking over their shoulders. You saw the way his power was slipping bit by bit, and how he didn't seem to notice, or maybe he noticed and just couldn't bear to admit it. That's the thing about power. It doesn't just walk out the door. It leaks away, like blood from a wound you didn't feel until it's too late. He tells it different now, says he was forced out, persecuted, driven away by cowards too afraid to face him. It sounds noble when he says it, like he's the hero of some grand tragedy. But you remember how it really happened. You remember how the people were starting to wonder if he was the problem, not the solution. How even his closest men started looking for the exits. You wonder if he even saw it coming, or if he ran because he knew the tide was turning. But exile has a way of making people forget. Time smooths out the rough edges, and what used to be rage becomes nostalgia. He knows that. He knows how memories fade, and how people would rather believe in a myth than remember the mess. It's easier to say he was wrong than to admit he was just a man who couldn't hold it together. So he leans into it. He tells the story like he's reading from a holy book. He says he was betrayed, sabotaged, torn from his rightful place by the corrupt and the fearful. He never admits to failure. He never owns up to the mistakes. In his story, he's the victim, always the victim. It's everyone else who got it wrong. And you can't help but wonder if he ever questions it, if in the quiet, when the room is empty and the applause is gone, he ever thinks, maybe it was me, maybe I failed, maybe I wasn't good enough, maybe the ones who turned on me did it because they had a reason. You doubt it. Men like him don't carry guilt. They trade it away for certainty. They make themselves into symbols so they don't have to be human. They don't sit and reflect. They keep moving, keep talking, keep building the myth until it's strong enough to hold up the weight of their mistakes. And even when someone does remember, an old journalist, a former minister, someone who hasn't forgotten how it really went down, he knows how to handle that too. First, he ignores it, pretends it doesn't matter, says they're just bitter, just jealous. And when that doesn't work, he discredits them, calls them traitors, foreign puppets, says they're trying to rewrite history. He'll drown them out with his own voice, make sure his myth is louder than the truth. If it gets worse, he just goes quiet, lets it die on its own, because he knows people don't hold on to details for long. Silence is his best weapon. Let the stories fade. Let the anger burn out. Eventually, people stop caring. They want the legend, not the facts. They want the hero, not the broken man behind the curtain. You know that's how he wins, not by fighting, but by outlasting. He doesn't need to confront the truth. He just needs to make sure it's buried under enough stories, enough noise, enough well-crafted lies. And after a while, the past becomes whatever he says it was. You wonder if he even remembers the truth anymore. Or if he's convinced himself that the myth is the real story. Maybe that's what keeps him going, believing his own lies until they feel like destiny. Maybe that's why he never looks back, because looking back might mean seeing all the things he can't admit to. And you sit there, watching him spin his tale, wondering if he knows he's fooling himself just as much as he's fooling everyone else, wondering if he ever realizes that guilt doesn't just go away because you ignore it, wondering if he'll ever have to face it, or if the myth will carry him all the way to the end. You know he's already seen it all in his head, the moment, the return, the crowd that swells like a tide, moving as one, pulling him back into their arms. He's not just stepping onto familiar soil. He's coming home to a kingdom that's been waiting for him. You know he's been playing that scene over and over, like a film reel he never wants to end. The return isn't just something he wants. It's something he believes is owed to him. He doesn't see it as a political maneuver. It's not some well-planned campaign or a slow, careful re-entry. It's destiny. It's fate pulling him back like a tide that can't be resisted. He doesn't just expect to return. He expects to be received. There's no doubt in his mind that the people have been holding their breath for him, that they've been waiting, just as he's been waiting. You know how he's done it too. He's been working at it for years, chipping away at the memory of his flaws, painting over the rough parts, talking about his time in power like it was the best the country ever had. He's got people thinking that when he was in charge, things were solid and strong, and every problem that came after was just proof that he was robbed of his rightful place. He doesn't need to tell the people directly that he's coming back. He lets the whispers take care of that. the way rumors do when they've got just enough truth to make them believable. He doesn't want his return to be a surprise. He wants it to feel inevitable, like the world's just been holding its breath for him to walk back in. He's not coming back as a politician. That would be too small. He's not coming back to run a campaign or win votes. That would be insulting. He's coming back as something bigger, something untouchable. He's not just a man anymore. He's the answer, the fix to everything that went wrong while he was gone. He's not going to ask for power. He's going to take it. Because it's always been his. Because leaving didn't mean losing it, just waiting for the right moment to take it back. He expects the streets to be flooded, banners in the air, his face looking out over the crowd. They'll be chanting his name, and he'll be looking down like a king surveying his subjects. He expects them to be angry, not at him, never at him, but at the ones who stayed behind and made a mess of things. He knows who he'll forgive, who he'll punish. He's made his list. The ones who claimed his place, the ones who didn't defend him, the ones who thought exile meant erasure, they'll get what's coming. He's already decided. But you can't help but wonder, what if it doesn't go the way he's planned? What if the country's not waiting for him like a lost lover, arms open and heart aching? What if they've learned to live without him? What if they don't see him as the answer anymore, just another ghost coming back to haunt them? It's a thought he never lets in. You know that. He's too far gone in his own myth. He's convinced that his absence made him a legend. But legends don't always come back to life. Sometimes they stay legends because the real thing isn't what people remember. What if the people have moved on, built something new, something that doesn't have a space shaped like him anymore? You wonder if he's ready to see that, to look out over the streets and find them empty, or worse, full of faces that don't light up at the sight of him, full of people who remember not just the myth, but the man, with all his flaws and failures still attached. What would he do if that happened? Would he try to force his way back in, twist their arms until they give in and pretend to need him? Or would he just turn around and walk away, exile all over again? Not because he was chased out this time, but because the country didn't recognize him anymore. He doesn't think that far ahead. He can't afford to. His whole myth is built on the idea that the people never stopped wanting him back, that their longing for him was as strong as his longing to return. You almost feel sorry for him, almost, because one day he's going to walk through those gates and find out that history kept moving while he stood still, and he's going to have to decide whether he's ready to be just a man again, or if he'll keep trying to bend the story to fit the version he's told himself all these years. And when that day comes, you wonder what will be stronger, the reality of his return or the illusion that kept him going. You're almost curious to see how he handles it, whether he'll fight for power that doesn't want him anymore, or whether he'll slip away, refusing to let go of the myth that made him feel like destiny itself. You know, he never thought this far ahead. The return was the end of the story, not the start of another one. He spent years telling himself that stepping back onto his homeland would be enough, that just being there in the flesh would put everything right. Like his presence alone would be enough to wash away the years and silence the doubts. You almost feel sorry for him, the way he stands there, soaking in the air like it's supposed to make him whole again. But there's nothing sacred about coming back. The soil doesn't open up to kiss his feet. The wind doesn't whisper his name. And the people, well, they're not the same people he left behind. They've had to figure things out without him. They've had to live with the mess he left, clean up the pieces, learn how to keep moving. He tries to talk like he used to, but something's different. His words don't land the way they once did. They float out there, but they don't stick. It's like he's a voice from another time, someone who's been left behind but hasn't figured it out yet. He tries to impose his will, to make the nation bend back to his shape, but the country's moved on. People have found new heroes, new ways to survive, and they're not so sure they want to go back to the way things were. It's not like he doesn't see it. He's not stupid. He knows something's wrong. The old tricks don't work anymore. The loyalists gather close, whispering about betrayal and disloyalty, feeding his pride like it's the only fuel they've got. They tell him the people will come around, that they just need time to remember who he is and what he means. But even they look nervous, like they're not sure he's the same man they used to follow. He still talks about his suffering, about the years he spent waiting, planning, enduring exile while the unworthy took his place. He tries to make it sound noble, like he's been tested and come back stronger. But suffering doesn't rule a country. Nostalgia doesn't fix roads or put food on tables. And the people, they don't eat myth. They don't fill their bellies with old stories and faded glories. So he pushes harder, tries to make his legend work for him, tells them he's back to finish what he started, that they owe him loyalty for all he gave up. But it doesn't sound right. Too sharp, too demanding, like he's not asking for trust, but demanding it like a debt that's long overdue. He thought coming back would be the answer, but it's just another problem. The country's different now. It's more complicated than he remembers. The streets are busier, the faces younger. They remember his name, but not like he hoped. He's the past, not the future. A man who thought his own myth would carry him forever. And when people start to push back, when they tell him it's not enough to just be back, he doesn't take it well. You can see it in his eyes, that glint of anger. How dare they question him? After all he's been through, after all he's done for them, it starts to curdle in him. The resentment, the sense that the people are the ones who've failed, not him. That they should have held on to his memory tighter, kept the legend alive without his help. He starts to see them not as his people, but as obstacles, obstacles to be cleared away, convinced, or crushed. He talks about restoring order, but you can hear it in his voice. He's not talking about justice. He's talking about control. He's talking about making them understand that they owe him their loyalty, that their uncertainty is a betrayal. The return was supposed to be the story's end, but now he's stuck in the aftermath, forced to reckon with the reality that power isn't waiting to throw itself at his feet. The myth didn't hold up under the weight of the real world. And for the first time, it's hitting him. Maybe he should have stayed gone. Maybe exile was kinder. Maybe being remembered was better than being tested. You watch him from the edges, wondering if he'll bend or if he'll break, if he'll accept the world as it is, or try to force it to fit his memory. You can see it tightening in his jaw, the bitterness gnawing at him. He doesn't know how to be just a man anymore. He spent too long telling himself he was a destiny. And now that he's back, he's not sure how to be anything else. You know he can't go back to exile, not after all this, not after making his return sound like salvation. Leaving again would be admitting defeat, admitting that the myth wasn't strong enough to hold up against reality. So he stays. He digs in his heels. He doubles down. He starts gathering the most loyal around him, the ones who still see him as something more than just a man. They're fewer than he thought, but they're loud, and they're angry, and they'll follow him anywhere, if it means making the world remember who he's supposed to be. They prop him up, tell him he's still the answer, that the people are just confused and need reminding. He likes that story. It feels good. It's easier than admitting that maybe he was wrong, that maybe he's just a ghost haunting a world that moved on without him. He tries to impose order, tries to make them see that his return is what they needed all along. But it's not working. The more he pushes, the more the people resist. They don't want to be ruled by memory. They want something that works now, something real, not just a legend brought back from the dead. You wonder if he sees it coming, the way power slips through his fingers like sand, the way his words lose their grip. You wonder if he knows that fear is the only thing keeping some of them in line now, that loyalty has curdled into something harder, something that could snap. You watch him try to force the myth to live again, like a man trying to make a corpse get up and walk. But deep down, he has to know it's over. You can see it sometimes when he thinks no one's watching. The way his shoulders slump just a little, the way his eyes go blank like he's trying to remember why he came back in the first place. He doesn't say it out loud, never will, but he knows. He knows the story is crumbling around him, and he doesn't have the strength to hold it up anymore. The loyalists keep shouting, keep demanding that the people give him what he's owed. But the crowds are thinner now. The chants are quieter. Even the streets feel different, less like they're waiting for him, and more like they're tolerating him. And he knows. God, he knows. Maybe one night he'll leave again, slip out in the dark before the last of his support dries up. Or maybe he'll dig in too deep and force a fight he can't win. You don't know. No one does. All you know is that he came back thinking he'd be welcomed like a king. And now he's just a man trying to convince himself that the world didn't change without him. You wonder if he'll ever admit it, if he'll ever let himself see that he's just a piece of history trying to live in a world that's already moved on. You wonder if he'll break down one night, staring at the empty streets, and finally let the truth sink in, that sometimes it's better to stay gone. But you know he won't. He's too proud, too stubborn, too convinced that the world owes him its loyalty. So he'll keep pushing, keep telling himself it was supposed to be different, that they're the ones who got it wrong. He'll cling to the myth until there's nothing left of it, even if it breaks him in the end. And you just sit there, watching it all play out, wondering how long it'll take him to realize he wasn't destiny, just a memory that people learned to live without. Or else he digs in, harder than ever. He refuses to bend, refuses to see what's right in front of him. He decides that if the people won't take him back willingly, he'll make them. If they can't see that his return is what they needed all along, then he'll force their eyes open. It's not about leading anymore. It's about control. It's about proving he was right all along, even if it means grinding the country into dust just to shape it back into something he can recognize. He calls it restoration, calls it necessary, says they're too divided, too corrupted by years without him, says he has to clean house, even if it means knocking it all down first. And so he starts with the loudest voices, the ones who question him, the ones who point out that he promised something different. He calls them traitors, calls them remnants of the regime that took his place. He says they're part of the reason things fell apart, that they're trying to sabotage his return. And bit by bit, he cuts them out. He sends his men to the newspapers, to the radio stations, to the places where dissent is whispered in low voices. He tightens his grip on every word spoken against him. Journalists vanish. Activists are driven underground. Opposition figures slip out in the dark, one by one, until they're gone. They find their way to border towns, to exile communities, to anywhere that's not here, because here isn't safe anymore. He doesn't just rule by fear, he rules by certainty, by convincing those who stay that he is the only answer, that anyone who resists is betraying the nation itself. He paints the opposition as outsiders, foreign puppets, cowards who couldn't stand to see the country rebuild. He makes sure people are too afraid to even think about resistance, too afraid to remember that they once dreamed of something different. You can see it happening. The streets growing quieter, the conversations in cafes becoming whispers. You see the fear creeping back in, the way people start talking about him, like he's inevitable, like resisting him is pointless. And you wonder, does he even know what he's done? Does he see that his obsession with being needed has turned him into the very thing he once claimed to fight against? Or is he so deep in his own myth that he can't see it anymore? Maybe he thinks he's purging the country of its rot, of its doubt, of its weakness. Maybe he thinks he's saving them by forcing them to bend. Or maybe he knows, deep down, that he's just too far gone to admit he lost. Either way, it doesn't matter. Exile's not just something he overcame. It's something he made someone else's problem. Because now it's his enemies who slip out in the night, carrying with them stories of betrayal and fear, wondering how the man they once believed in turned into this. And he doesn't even notice. He's too busy making sure his story sticks, making sure the myth of his return doesn't unravel. He doesn't see that he's just trading places with the ones who came before him, repeating the same mistakes, building the same fears. And somewhere out there, in another dusty border town, the new exiles gather. They talk about him like he used to talk about the old regime. They tell stories about how they had to run, about how they can't go back, about how the man who promised them liberation has become their newest tyrant. You wonder if one of them will rise up the way he did, carrying the same fire, the same certainty that they're the real savior. You wonder if history's just spinning in circles, trading one exile for another, one myth for the next. And when the time comes, will he recognize his own reflection in the faces of those he drove out? Or will he just call them traitors and dig in deeper, convinced that he's still the only answer, even as the country he fought to reclaim slips through his fingers once again